Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer quick match gameplay. This time around I'm playing as Wood Elves against the Empire, led by the Pharaoh of War on the map Karak Buftar. I'm about to try something a little bit different. I used to play Wood Elves quite a bit, especially for campaign, and so I haven't given them that much time in quick match, but I definitely want to give it some try, some attempt. And so here, going against Empire, I was a little worried about a flying goon squad, so I only went with quick flying units. I went with the Glady on a Eagle. I did make a slight mistake. Of course, I ran Arrow of Kurnus, I ran Prevan Threma, I ran a Push of Toughness, Full Hardiness, but I also ran the Eye of Kurnus. The missile damage could technically be nice, but usually when you're running a Flying Lord, it's not with the rest of your army. So you don't get much benefit out of that, except maybe for yourself and the Hawk Riders. So I think that was a bit of a waste of points. Backing that up, I have a Branch Wraith. Branch Wraith is coming in with the Withering, Earthblood, and Melkoth's Mystifying Miasma, plus a Scroll of Protection, and and most importantly, I think, actually, for the way I'm using him here, other than Lore of Life, or the Earthblood, is he provides extra melee attack and extra mobility to all my units on the field. So plus 6% mobility for the Wardancers gives them an additional 3 points of speed, which is actually decent. I mean, it puts them even closer to enemy heavy cap mobility. It gives their Eternal Guard a little bit more mobility, probably about, I think it's about 2 points there, maybe just 1. Actually, it might be 3 as well. I think they start only at 35, and definitely makes the Hawk Riders even faster than they already are, which they're already pretty ridiculously quick. And then plus 8 melee attack for all units around the Branch Wraith, which is huge because the Eternal Guard have pretty terrible melee attack stats, only 26. So definitely a solid boost. I think yeah, it's definitely a solid boost. I think here we go. I'll try to mouse over it. Call of the Woods plus 8 melee attack affects all allies in range. They have to be within a 30-meter radius, which is fairly small, but once you're clustered up, it's not bad. Then for my front line, I'm running a row of Eternal Guard with shields, anti-large, armor piercing, silver shield, so very resistant to missile fire. Just a very solid unit overall. Empire does tend to bring a decent amount of missiles and heavy cavalry against Wood Elves, so against both of those, a very solid choice in my opinion. Behind them, I've got 2 units of Glade Guards with Starfire Shaft, just to pepper the enemy down. They do magic and fire damage, but the Empire doesn't have anything resistant to either of those, really. Knights of the Blazing Sun have slight magic resistance, but that's about it. And they do armor piercing, so against something like, say, Great Swords, they can be very good. Shutting down enemy skirmishers, that sort of thing, will do well. And then Hawk Riders. Over here, 2 units of them. They're very quick. I mostly bring them from the melee. Their range is fairly bad, though they can pepper down something like, say, Flagellants kind of effectively. Their missile damage isn't terrible, especially when against something that has no armor to begin with. And then for my damage dealing portion, I guess, of my army, really, Wardancers. I brought 2 units of Wardancers with Azrai Spears to shut down enemy heavy cap, 2 units of Wardancers with swords. I know these aren't a very popular pick, but I decided to try them out against the enemy squishy units after doing some theory crafting and customs. So I'm going to start the game. I do immediately push forward with my Lord. My opponent's army is Knights of the Blazing Sun, Royal Thorfgrifites, and the Light Wizard for that terror and fire damage against Wood Elves. Very potent because Wood Elves have a lot of stuff susceptible to fire. And then 2 units of Reichsguard and Boris over here. The Light Wizard does have the Net of Mintok. As you can see, the Hammer of the Witches, which I actually didn't notice immediately because it was its flag was screened a little by the swordsman, opens fire on me immediately, starts picking off models on the Hawk Riders, is here just to force me to come close to my opponent. The silver bullets are just hidden back here, ready to snipe down my Lord if she attempts to get cheeky, or my Hawk Riders. You know, spearmen just kind of to protect the cannon. And then a front line of swordsmen to fight the Wood Elves. They do have shields, they have some armor. They have okay melee attack and melee defense, so they should hold fairly well against a normal Elven infantry force. Definitely, I think a solid army. I do know Flagellants are fairly popular for Empire, but given that my opponent was running so much so many cavalry units, he probably had to make cuts elsewhere, and that's probably why he ended up with swordsmen, or maybe just for the missile resistance as well. Flagellants are really susceptible to missiles, and of course Wood Elves do have a habit of bringing, or definitely potential to bring, a very skirmish-heavy build. So I do slightly outnumber my opponent, because of course cavalry takes up a lot of space, but the Wardancers are smaller than average unit. They actually have fairly high HP per model, though. As you can see, they practically match the Eternal Guard with shields, despite having 15 models less. So obviously, of course, not something chosen levels, but definitely a higher end HP pool for infantry. Now here I'm just moving to engage my opponent. Unfortunately, these Eternal Guard do get caught out a little bit. My Glade Guard with Starfires are immediately opening fire because I didn't turn their auto fire off. And unfortunately, I let my Wardancers get a little bit ahead of my Eternal Guard, and so they're actually ended up absorbing this charge from the Swordsman. Definitely not the best use of them. I do manage to pull these guys back, though, just in time to let the Eternal Guard take the hit. Over here, I'm trying to match my opponent's cavalry with my infantry, and over here I move my Azrai Spears hoping to intercept my opponent's cavalry, and it does not work out because he just plows into my Eternal Guard with shields and starts destroying them. They were braced because they were stationary, but still a problem. Over here, Hammer of the Witches is still sniping away at me. Net of Mintok goes down to deny these Wardancers the ability to counterattack. Over here, Wardancers with swords go in against the swordsmen. Over here, they're already tied down in the fight here, and they're doing really well. Unfortunately, I forgot about these Wardancers with Azrai Spears, so not only are they taking unnecessary losses, they're also doing. They're also not ready to counteract this enemy charge that's going to come in back here, straight into the back of my archers. And these Eternal Guard, of course, are too slow to match them. Branch Wraith is here. I try to intercept it, but it's not really a chance of that happening. And they are simply going to get into the back of these Glade Guard with Starfire shafts. As you can see, Wood Elves do get tired fairly quickly from shooting, so that's definitely a bit of a problem. This Net of Mintok was actually overcast, which is a bit of an interesting pick. One of these units of Hawk Riders breaks. The other one, though, does dive in on the Silver Bullets, just tying him down, beating him up. But in the meantime, Wardancers and Eternal Guard with shields have pushed through and are now going to go for the enemy backline, which they should do fairly well. And these units of Eternal Guard back here and the Wardancers with Azrai Spears are pushing into my opponent's cavalry down here, some of which is trapped in this cluster. And you're going to try to kill them off. I do drop a Withering on my opponent's units here, just to drop their leadership, also to drop their armor a little bit, make it just a little bit easier for my non-armor piercing units to do some damage. As I've mentioned before against Dwarves, the minus 30 isn't the greatest against Empire Cav because of how much armor they have, but it will do something. Over here, the Rex Guard is engaged in a battle with Wardancers, where they will do fairly well, but not against the Eternal Guard with shields, and those are just dishing out a lot of hurt. Over here, as you can see, because the fight is becoming very, very clustered, and because of that, my Branch Wraith, even though having only 30 meters of radius on the AoE melee buff, of course getting actually a big value out of it here, because the whole fight is so clumped up. I cast another Arrow of Kurnus here. I think it hits the Reichsguard. Gets a few kills there. My Glade Lord, I'm trying to use her to snipe down the enemy cavalry, but she's getting shot at by the Hammer of the Witches. So I do try to deal with the Hammer of the Witches with my Hawk Riders. My opponent does pull his spears back and drops the Net of a Mintok on him, which ties him down, which is definitely not good for me. Over here, though, Eternal Guard with shields are in the back of his cavalry. His cavalry is kind of breaking. The fact that I got this round was definitely useful for me at breaking my opponent's morale. Knights of the Blazing Stone pull back, but and I dropped the Prayer of Anathema hoping to catch him. But unfortunately, my opponent does have this unit of swordsmen here just tying me down, preventing me from catching his Knights of the Blazing Sun. Definitely a very cost-efficient and smart move here, I think. My Starfire Shafts got absolutely mauled by that cavalry charge. This unit of Eternal Guard is really mauled. But shortly I will start pulling him back in, have him open fire on my opponent's cavalry formations, have him open fire on his lords, that sort of thing. These swords finally do break, but it meant that I got no real use out of the Prayer of Anathema. You can see one of the Knights of the Blazing Sun there gets sniped by my Glady, but really I got very little use out of it there. And that was a little unfortunate. It could have definitely been a very decisive move if I'd been able to strip this unit down. Now my opponent charges me again, and unfortunately, charging against Wood Elves with this much anti-large is not the best of things. I've cast another Earthblood. I've already cast one before in this big fight over here. I cast a normal one here because I didn't have the Winds of Magic for Overcast, and I wasn't going to for a while. Over here, though, Wardancers on top of the Hammer of the Witches and on top of the Spearmen, and they're actually destroying both. I was debating casting their ability here, decide against it, because the Spearmen have very low melee attacks, so does the Hammer of the Witches. So I'm not too worried about getting hit in return. Just chewing through those guys very quickly. And the Hawk Riders do come back, though they're not going to be able to do too much. No, Mintok goes down with my Lord here. I'm not entirely sure what my opponent was worried about. Maybe he was worried that I was going to rear charge him with the Glady. I wasn't really planning to do that. I want to keep her up in the air as long as possible. The Eagle isn't the best of melee combatants. Over here, the Eternal Guard is doing actually really well, especially with that +8 melee attack. The Light Wizard is getting chewed up. The Knights of the Blazing Sun are racking up a lot of kills, but they are getting destroyed by that anti-large. Royal of Griffiths destroyed by that anti-large. Boris is forced to flee. Obviously, he has a lot of he's able to regen, so he's gonna recover most of that. But still, definitely effective. Unfortunately, this Arrow of Kurnus, I think there there was a Griff fight here, and the Arrow of Kernus goes after that, so that was a bit of a mistake. Over here, the Silver Bullets are getting wrecked by the Hawk Riders, who are very low on HP. They're almost dead, actually. But I do get some damage into these Silver Bullets and force them, I do believe, to break, which is definitely a win for me, even though shortly after the Hawk Riders immediately shatter, and so I'm not able to bring them back. Wardancers in the meantime shooting through these spearmen, but they've already driven off the crew from the Hammer of the Witches, and the crew at this point is so small that it's not really going to be able to reman it fully. The swordmen are getting slaughtered over here by my blob of infantry. I'm shooting him in the back with the Gladiator with Starfire shafts. I push my Glady forward just to get some pot shots at my opponent as he's pushing into my Wardancers. Unfortunately, Wardancers don't have much armor piercing. They only have 8 out of their 40 weapon strength is armor piercing, so they're not really capable of doing very much. So Griffites or Knights of the Blazing Sun, they're much better dealing with squish units. In the meantime, Starfire shafts are peppering away at Boris over here, just trying to get a little bit of damage. Every little bit counts. Obviously, I want to get rid of his regen as much as possible. Hit him there with the Lord, or the Glady. And over here I drop another Earthblood, which is healing my Eternal Guard. I do try to catch these Royal Altar of Griffites with the Prayer of Anathrema, but unfortunately, because they were already in the middle of their charge, I suppose, it doesn't stop them. But now they are trapped in a melee that they really cannot win against a blob of spear-armored infantry, including Azrai spears, and Eternal Guard with shields, all buffed by that Branch Wraith. And in here, because if you remember, I was dealing with those swordsmen down here. Now this full force is pushing into my opponent's back. Some still intact Wardancers with swords, Wardancers with Azrai spears, and Eternal Guard with shields. Fortunately, they do get caught by a net of a Mintok, but it's no longer overcast. It's not gonna be long before my opponent, before I'm on top of my opponent. If he tries to reman the Hammer of the Witches, I do actually snipe at it a little bit with the Glady. Pop a potion of foolhardiness because I was planning to charge her in to my opponent's back. By this point, his army does start breaking. His cav is very, very badly mauled, and they're routing from the field. At this point, my opponent does decide to call it a game. So, very close match. Lots of fun. I just want to go over my build here a little bit and explain some of the decisions. As you can see, the losses were very high on both sides, but in the end, mine were a bit lower. This was a very... Compared to a lot of Wood Elf builds rely on Wild Riders for damage, because Wild Riders are a very powerful unit. And so, and otherwise they rely on Shriekin to hold their ground in the front. So those are like two very popular picks for Wood Elves, and I didn't want to bring either of them. I was a little worried about fire damage with the Shriekin, and Wild Riders I don't really like they're really bad against Empire Heavy Cav, so I didn't really want to bring them. So I wanted to give a shot to something. I wanted to give a shot to something a little different. So I brought the Glady on an Eagle, obviously not to get caught by a flying goon squad, because the Elven flying units, except for the dragon, are all very, very quick. They can easily kite everything else in the sky, and especially with that boost from the Branch Wraith. She definitely got some kills on the heavy cav and was definitely distracting my opponent's cannon fire, getting some cannonballs to the face, which I'm honestly okay with. It's better than having my infantry torn to bits by the cannon fire or the Hawk Riders, though the Hawk Riders didn't get much done. The Prey of Anathema proved very useful, though I did have some where I wasn't quite able to capitalize on it in full. And the Arrow of Kernus definitely landed a few decent hits that just helped destroy the Royal Altar of Griffites, helped destroy some of the Reiksguard. Definitely had a decent use out of it. It's definitely a strong spell if you can especially if you can get all three casts off in the course of a battle. Backing that up, of course, I brought the Branch Wraith, and I explained a little bit about the melee attack. Plus 8 melee attack is huge for Eternal Guard. That's about a 30%, I do believe, boost to their melee attack, which is fairly lackluster. Otherwise, actually might be a little more. It might be like 35 to 40%. And it helps the Wardancers even more. The Wardancers out of spears don't have a terrible melee attack, especially not for spear infantry, but it's also not amazing. So the fact that you get plus 8 means that they will basically tear through. Most heavy cavalry does not have good, or shock cavalry doesn't have good melee defense. So the Wardancers with Azrai spears, actually most cavalry period doesn't have good melee defense. The only one that really does, is off the top of my head, is the Grail Guardians. So and maybe the normal Demigriffs, but Wardancers were just able to chew through those like knife through butter through the heavy cav very effectively. Eternal Guard, of course, just to hold the front line. Two of them actually gated Chevron, and one of these was the units I think that pushed through my opponent's front line and went after his back. Two of them, these two did start with the Chevron, but still very impressive that they gained one over the course of the battle. They definitely held the front line against enemy infantry, traded fairly efficiently, though they are more expensive. And then once things broke down into that cavalry on infantry fight, they did an amazing job. The Wardancers with swords actually did fairly well. And I was definitely impressed. I did some theory crafting and some testing, in-game testing with them. As you can see, these guys gained a Chevron. These spears gained a Chevron too. But I did some testing, and the biggest problem for Wardancers is that if they absorb the enemy charge, they are going to take a massive amount of damage and just get deleted. So they're best for flanking, and generally people prefer Wild Riders for that, but they are a little cheaper than Wild Riders, so I wanted to give them a shot. And they do have some physical resistance, so the fact that their armor's terrible isn't the end of the world. They do, of course, have that ability to boost their melee defense. In theory, I think they can actually absorb a charge fairly well if you make a very small frontage, so that only your front two, say, Wardancers, eat the enemy charge. And that way you can absorb it on the and have a very efficient trading fight with, say, Flagellants. Otherwise, Flagellants, if you pop your ability, Flagellants will trash Wardancers. They'll actually beat them despite being significantly cheaper. And if you do a general straight head-to-head, the Wardancers will just barely come out on top. But if you manage to do that thin frontage, the Wardancers will come out on top with about a third of their HP and over half of their models. It's still intact, which is definitely very impressive. Definitely helps a lot. Flagellants get a lot out of that charge. And then, of course, this 130 kills. 30 of that is this gun, or about 30 of that is going to be this gun battery, but the rest of it was enemy infantry that was just getting demolished. Maybe some cavalry in there, too. Then these Wardancers, definitely decent against the squishy infantry, and did some damage against the cavalry, despite their low armor piercing. And the Wardancers with Azrai Spear over here, of course, just demolishing the enemy heavy cav. Some did get tied down early on fighting the swords, but most of this was probably against the Demigryphs, the Knights of the Blazing Sun, the Reiksguard, and that is definitely very, very solid performance. And these four units, the Glade Guard with Starfire Shots and Hawk Riders, I didn't get much use out of. The Glade Guard they didn't really get enough protection. I microed one of the Wardancers, pushed them too far. They got stuck in the melee early on, and then they weren't available to protect my backline, which resulted in the Glade Guard getting hit by that heavy cav. That just kind of was the end game for them. Even though they did escape, once they came back, they had like a third of their models. Definitely not great. So that was definitely a problem on my part. And then the Hawk Riders also a problem on my part. I didn't really micro them properly. I threw them at the Hammer of the Witches, which they did well against. They definitely tied down the Silver Bullets and the Hammer of the Witches. But I allowed them to get caught by ground units. They're really bad in extended melee. They're more like a dive in, do a rear charge, get your armor piercing damage in, one shot, and bail out. I wasn't really capitalizing on that. For my opponent, very good cast from the Light Wizard. Boris definitely gave him a strong melee lord who could just stay in there, and I had some trouble shutting down, especially because of his innate regen. And the Light Wizard, of course, those Nets of Mintok. And he actually got a decent amount of kills too, which is a little surprising. But definitely those Nets of Mintok were shutting me down. They stopped my Azrai Spears from coming in to save the Eternal Guard when they got hit by all that cavalry. They helped shut down my Lord. They helped shut down counterattacking infantry. Definitely got very good use out of Net of Mintok. Very well played there. The Spearmen did try to defend the artillery. They kind of failed because Wardancers are much better than they are, even with rank 7. So my opponent just kind of got wrecked there. The Spears got wrecked there. But they are much cheaper, so that is something to keep in mind. Wardancers cost almost 3 times as much, 800 to 300. Though with the Veterancy, it's probably more like double. And then the swordsmen over here, 4 units of them, they definitely held their ground okay. They definitely traded fairly effectively, given that they were stuck fighting Eternal Guard. And Eternal Guard is much more expensive, Eternal Guard with shields, so that's something to keep in mind, that even though they didn't perform amazing, and were veteraned up, of course, they definitely, I think, performed in a cost-efficient manner. Silver Bullets got practically no use, once again, because I focused them down very early. Just like my opponent went to shut down my Glade Guard as quick as he could, I went to shut down both his Hammer of the Witches and the Silver Bullets as quick as I could. And definitely shut the Silver Bullets down very, very efficiently. Reiksguard and the Knights of the Blazing Sun did absolutely amazing work. Actually, so did the Royal Fights did okay amounts of work. Given that most of my units were infantry, and actually all the ones who were on the ground were infantry, then 44 kills isn't that great for such an expensive unit. If I'd brought more large, it would have probably gotten more usage out of them. But Knights of the Blazing Sun, absolutely amazing damage. They actually are very solid troops against Elves because of how many units are susceptible to fire damage on the list. For me, though, this time around, only the Branch Wraith was really weak against them, and it was usually in the middle of the fight somewhere, so hard to surround. Yeah, definitely dishing out very good amounts of damage. Unfortunately, because I had so much armor piercing anti-large, they just weren't really able to bust through. It still wasn't, I think, efficient trading. Even these Knights of the Blazing Sun, I'm not entirely sure it was a cost-efficient trade against my infantry blob. And of course, the Royal Fight is very cost inefficient. Hammer of the Witches got some use early on, picking off my Hawk Riders, and definitely forced me to come to my opponent. But after that, it was, I think, a bit of a waste of points, because I got on top of it and kind of shut it down. After that, I was taking pot shots at my Glade Lord, which isn't a lot. My Glade Lord did have a potion of healing, or a potion of toughness, so it wasn't too much of a problem. But definitely a fun match, definitely a close match. Definitely a good game to my opponent. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like or subscribe down below. If you have any comments, criticism, if you would like to see me showcase other units that aren't seen too often, or units that are seen often, just see how they're used, or you have any comps you'd like me to try out, do feel free to share those down in the comments below. I'll be sure to read them as soon as I can, and respond as quickly as I can. Once again, I appreciate you all for watching, and Wyvern out.